As the world and India come to grips with the coronavirus pandemic, the economy has been ravaged and businesses are feeling the heat. But pharma companies have taken center stage and India will have a huge role to play. It is the world's largest generic player with 50% share in the vaccine and 20% share of the total market. It's expected to become a $100 billion industry in less than 5 years. But the road ahead has its challenges. Factories are still not running on full capacity. The lockdown has thrown the labor market out of whack. New launches may see delays and the supply chain disruption is a cause for concern. Another main concern is with R&D spending. In FY16, Indian pharma companies spent under 8% of their sales on research and development. It went up closer to 9% in FY17, but since then, it has been declining steadily. How can we ensure R&D spending goes up, and what does the future hold for the Indian generics industry? Well, joining me on this discussion to take these issues forward, Ajay Piramal, the chairman of the Piramal Group, Samina, Hamied, executive vice chairman at Cipla, and Pankaj, Patel, chairman of Zydus Cadila Healthcare. Gentlemen and Samina, many thanks for joining us here on the program. Let me start by talking to you about India's role and relevance in the global market. Now, India has a 20% share in the generic drug market globally. It's the third largest producer of pharma drugs by volumes globally. Indian companies supply 4 out of 10 generic drugs consumed in the US. So let's start by talking about the US. And Samina, I'll start by asking you about what you make of the signals coming in from President Trump. President Trump saying, and I quote, "Today I'm declaring a simple but vital national goal. The US will be the world's premier pharmacy, drugstore and medical manufacturer." What do you make of these comments? Do you believe that beyond rhetoric, this could have an impact on the Indian pharmaceutical industry?
So I think, Indian generic manufacturers, 1 in every 3 pill in the US is actually a pill that's manufactured in India. So while the Buy America campaign is taking up a lot of steam in the US, I think there's a long pathway ahead. So it starts with the APIs, which are the active ingredients right after the manufacturing. And I think, while America is pushing really hard to say in America, for America, I think there's a pathway for this, and there could be partnership models with Indian companies for manufacturing in the US.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you believe that this could in fact be an opportunity, a further opportunity for Indian companies to partner with their US counterparts. But Mr. Patel, let me ask you what you make of these comments that have come in from President Trump. And do you, like Samina, believe that this is more rhetoric at this point in time, given the sheer cost advantage that countries like India and China enjoy, as well as the API supply chain? It's unlikely that this Make in America, for America movement of the pharmaceutical industry is going to gather momentum anytime soon.
So I would agree with Samina on what she's talking about. The challenge is that the US wants to see that there is a more production happening in US to ensuring the supply chain, which any country will think like in this kind of crisis. India has been proven to be a very successful and reliable partner to US up till now. And even during the crisis, India has supplied all those generic products freely and fully. As a result, US is not facing any problem with respect to supply, in spite of the fact that there were some supply disruption happening earlier time because of the Chinese epidemic there. So given that track record, we very strongly believe that India is poised to actually partner with US to make sure that the supply uncertainty of the world is taken care of. Now, if you look at manufacturing of pharmaceutical and in any country, you start with API and the intermediates. And a classical process of process development, scaling up, putting up a plant and then getting FDA clearance would generally take about 3 years time, and for subsequently the product. Given that it is not going to be something which can happen overnight by putting a lot of money behind it, because it's not the question of money, it's work and time is required to complete every study which is required before a product is manufactured in any plant. So given that it is not a thing, but I think every country of the world is going to think like that. And as Indian companies, we are also very clear that India has to partner with countries to make sure that the supply chain surety is there.
Yes, we will have to partner with countries, and you're absolutely right. Everyone is talking the language of economic patriotism in India. We're calling it the Atmanirbhar mission. Mr. Piramal, let me come to you now, and let's talk specifically about this API business. Now, China has 20% of market share in the API production globally. India's dependence on China has been declining. We still are significantly dependent on China for APIs, but it has been declining. What do you make of the government's efforts to ramp up our capabilities in the API supply chain? How do you see that panning out, and what do you believe more needs to be done to ensure the robustness of this plan?
So I think what is really important now for every country is to ensure that the supply chain is secured. This is what Pankaj Bhai said, and I agree with that. And like when I see it, we have manufacturing facilities of both API and finished formulations. Whether it's in the US, we have facilities in Canada, the UK, and India. It's important that every country is looking how they can secure their sources of manufacturing. And as I see it, the importance of some critical manufacturing taking place in the various geographies is going to become even more important, because nobody wants to. It is almost like you have to keep your defense like a military defense, and you have to keep investing in it. So I see that happening, and definitely I think this whole crisis has shown that there is there is too much of reliance on just one country, and people are looking to diversify, and so will India look.
Yes, diversification clearly seems to be a risk mitigation strategy. But Mr. Patel, let me come to you. And, I remember having this conversation with you a few months ago where you were very clear that we need to go beyond intent. I mean, all of this sounds good on paper, but it needs to be fast-tracked into execution if India wants to make good of this opportunity of emerging as a strong contender to China in the API space. Now, we've seen several meetings, several discussions, draft policy being put in place. Do you believe that that is good enough? And how do you see this playing itself out? Also, do you believe that this case of India being dependent on China for APIs is overstated? Because G.V. Prasad just a few days ago on my program, on the Global Dialogue, seemed to suggest that it was overstated.
So, Shereen, I think government has come out with this API policy, which is the right policy to move forward and manufacture API in India. Unfortunately, as soon as the policy was announced, this COVID crisis came up, and things have moved. Our attention, all of us, have moved towards how to fight the COVID crisis and continue running manufacturing facility. I think that those are now almost stabilized, and we know what is the next normal for us. So we are all looking at now what we can do with the API. The policy is very positive. I believe it is an advanced stage for a final policy guideline to come out so that people can make application and start going for it. But if you see the list of the drugs which is there in that, there are a limited number of APIs for which we need to really backward integrate. Many of them, we do not need to do it. Now, I give you an example. Hydroxychloroquine, we are the manufacturer. We were getting one intermediate from China at those time. Moment we learned that those Chinese problem is there and supply may not come in, we immediately moved our machinery in place, and within less than 4 weeks we could start making that intermediate also in India. So I think Indian companies and chemists have capability to make this happen. Some fiscal support was necessary, which government has now come out with a policy to provide, and I'm pretty sure that in next few years you will see India would become much more self-reliant than it was ever.
Okay. That's good to hear. So you believe that the API policy is going to take off, so to speak. But Mr. Patel, since you brought up the issue of hydroxychloroquinines, let me ask you that, because there was a lot of hope that this could be not just a prophylaxis against COVID-19, but also an effective cure. Now, we've seen WHO suspending trials, the US FDA issuing warnings. France has issued a similar warning as well. Have you started to see an impact as far as HCQ orders are concerned?
No. we are still getting a lot of orders.
Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay, but what do you make of the various warnings and the decision of the WHO, etc., to suspend trials when it comes to HCQ in the use of COVID-19?
So I think ultimately, when you do a clinical trial, there is a process under which there is a data safety committee which has to review the data at certain interval and then move forward. Since the data safety committee is not yet met, the WHO has put a hold on the clinical trial, and based on the data, what safety committee's outcome, they will take a call. So as far as we are concerned, we are a manufacturer and we are happy to supply. We are not involved in any clinical studies that we can comment about the clinical outcome of the drug.
You're absolutely right. You're not involved in the clinical studies. And so far, you're saying that you haven't seen any slowdown in the orders. The orders continue to come in for HCQ. But Samina, let me move to the other issue, and that is of R&D spends. And once again, I go back to the data. The aggregate R&D spend of domestic pharmaceutical companies rose to 9% in FY17 versus almost 6% in FY11. But since then, we've seen a steady decline. Now, the emphasis not just on development, but more so on research. When you compare what the US is spending, what China is spending, which goes, has been steadily increasing from $10 billion to now about $30 billion every year. What more needs to be done by Indian pharma companies as we move forward?
So I think that's a very valid question, Shereen. Indian companies are in the range of 7 to 10% in terms of R&D spend. And I think this gives reason for a solid partnership, whether it's with government organizations, whether it's research institutes, whether it's with the medical fraternity, etc. And the government does have to boost R&D by incentivizing pharma companies and also having a very favorable pricing policy post new launches, because that is the only way that pharma companies can recover the very large spend on R&D for new products.
Mr. Piramal, let me put that question to you. As Samina was pointing out, you need an environment, that allows for fair pricing. But in most cases, we haven't really seen the government intervene by way of price caps, except for as and when necessary. So what will it take for Indian companies to push ahead on spending more on research and development, or are we largely going to continue to track what we've done so far, which is essentially repurposing and stay with the generics business?
A few years ago, we had perhaps the largest investment in a research facility in India, and that was doing pure research. But unfortunately, after several years of trying, maybe 10 years of trying, we had to shut it down. That's because there is no environment to encourage pure research of discovery of new drugs in India. It's important that, first of all, we allow clinical trials today in India. At one time, people thought would be a big industry for India, but unfortunately it's not taken off because the regulations for clinical trials are just not there. The time it takes for approval, the liabilities that you have in a clinical trial, and so many more things that are there, it's not there. That's one. Second, I think we have to develop a cluster approach where we have expertise in biology, which is not very well prevalent in India. We have expertise much more in chemistry, and that's why you find the development taking place. But true research is not taking place today in India. And in fact, I'm sorry to say that after so many decades of the pharmaceutical industry and having so many strengths compared to many other countries, we still have not got a single drug that is in the global market discovered out of India.
Pankaj Patel, why is that the case? To both Samina's point and Mr. Piramal's point, what is holding us back?
So I think, Shereen, there are 2 points. One is we require an ecosystem which is supportive to R&D. And innovation always have taken a backseat as far as India is concerned. There are no incentivization of innovation. There are no funding mechanism available for doing innovation. You mentioned about, Western companies spending large amount of money. Now, if we have in our pocket, we will also like to spend and do research. But where is that money? Because the point remains that we are highly price controlled, and in a way that research is not encouraged. Now, if you do research, there has to be a return in order to make sure that you continue investing on research. So I think incentivizing of research, creating an ecosystem in India for that is going to be very important. The point also is that we set up so many government labs and also many now NIPERs and things like that. They all have to become partnering with industry or partnering with others to make sure that more and more new drugs development activity does happen in India. But along with that, we require
do you feel confident at all, sir?
So I am very confident.
Given what I'm hearing from the three of you, you are confident.
Shereen, I am confident that India would change and India would move towards innovation. We as a company very strongly believe in that, and we continue to invest in research. We have found our ways to make that happen, and we are pretty sure that we will have number of new molecules coming out of our research pipeline. The question here is that we need to really create an ecosystem in India, and there the government has to play a very, very important role.
Okay, Samina, on that point, what is the role that you want the government to play to encourage and incentivize this ecosystem? Do you share Mr. Patel's optimism that yes, we will make some breakthroughs on innovation? What are you at Cipla, for instance, doing to ensure that that is a reality?
So I completely, agree with Pankaj Bhai. I think it's all about the ecosystem. I think funding. I think creating an opportunistic funding environment is important. I think also important is partnerships. Like he mentioned around NIPER and ICMR, etc. Partnering with private companies to create this innovation hub. It's also about incentivizing. About through your tax regime, can you incentivize R&D expenditure? So I think, these three are three important levers to encourage pharma companies, to be at the forefront of innovation.
Yes, I think there is consensus on this panel that a lot more needs to happen as far as the regulatory environment and the pricing environment is concerned to encourage investments. Speaking of the regulatory environment, let me get the three of you to also tell me a little bit about what you make of the latest trends that seem to be emerging in our efforts to engage with the US FDA. Do you believe that given the momentum that's building up on India being a much more committed partner with the US, that some of the red flags that we've seen in the recent past with the US FDA raising, those might be issues of the past? Do you believe that we're probably going to see a smoother road ahead with the US FDA, Mr. Patel?
So there has been always a smooth road with FDA. You have to be compliant. And if you're not compliant, you are going to face some issues. So I don't think we can say that FDA, we cannot blame FDA for that. If you have to blame ourselves. The moment we change the mindset and start blaming ourselves, we will correct and we will always have a smooth path. That's the way I would look at it.
I think that's very appropriately put, that we need to follow global best practices and regulatory crosshairs with the US FDA will be dealt with. Let me ask you, Samina and Mr. Piramal, to give me an indication of how things are on the ground. Samina, let me start by asking you, what is the current capacity, production capacity? Are you back up to normal levels? What is the situation as far as labor is concerned? Is that a pain point today? When do you anticipate recovery in the domestic market?
So Shereen, we are lucky, we are pharma and we are insulated from the demand shock and we never stopped. So while we limped initially and activation on the ground was tough because you were coordinating with the diktat of the central government and how it was mobilized on the ground by the state government, there was also a heightened risk. People were not educated enough about COVID-19 and the risk that lay ahead. So it took us some amount of mobilization to get our plants, back up. It's also the ancillary services, the entire supply chain, raw material, packing material, etc., that needed also to be coordinated and synced in. We now see production up to the levels about 80-90%. We definitely see a slowdown in the demand generation. So while supply security has increased, we definitely see a slowdown in the demand generation. Then we saw possibly in March and April, there was a lot of panic buying happening. We definitely see those levels soften now.
Mr. Patel, would you agree? Are you also witnessing the same, that there has been, after that initial panic buying that we saw, there's been a slowdown in demand? And what about your own production as well as the supply chain issues?
So, Shereen, I think I would agree with Samina that our production has come to normal production. Most of the plant are at full capacity. Some of them are 80% plus capacity. So I think that from that point of view, we are very well placed, and I think going forward, supply surety is there. On the demand side, yes, there is shutdown, and as a result, many places, clinics are not open, doctors are not going, patients are avoiding going there because some people are in containment zone or red zone, not going. Given that today, in my estimate, about 50% of the area is either in red or containment zone. And obviously, those are the areas where activities of healthcare related activity have gone down significantly. Plus, the hospitals which were treating other patients are mostly treating COVID patients, and as a result, there is a kind of change which is we are seeing. We're seeing that this is going to be a phase wherein now that things are opening up in next couple of months, things will start becoming normal, and the demand will again start back climping up.
Demand you expect will limp up. Mr. Piramal, let me ask you, because at the start of the program, we were talking about opportunities for partnership, licensing arrangements. We've seen licensing arrangements coming in for Gilead's Remdesivir in the context of COVID-19, Cipla with Toxicilizumab, that licensing arrangement with Roche, etc. What is your own expectation on the nature of these partnerships? More licensing agreements, or do you believe that we're likely to see FDI coming in as well? There's been a lot of speculation around your own pharma business and private equity interest. What do you anticipate going forward?
So our business is slightly different. Out of our turnover last year of about 5,500 crores, only 7% of it was sold in India. Most of our business is actually sold in the US, in Europe, Japan. And here I find that when you were talking about supply, and we have manufacturing, as I said, everywhere across the world, and including in India. The manufacturing in India was affected in the first few weeks of April, but then it has now come down to normal, and globally it was not much affected. So that's the positive. I can see that there's a lot more interest now towards companies trying to work closely with us so that they are secure about their supply chain. And that's where I feel that India is going to become even more, an Indian company is going to become a bigger and more reliable supplier to the world. So I see opportunities in licensing, and I see opportunities in many more partnerships, collaborations, how to launch newer products globally as well.
Okay. What about private equity interest? Anything on the anvil as far as your pharma business is concerned?
I think whenever, as and when something of interest happens, Shereen, I will be very happy to let you know.
Well, we look forward to hearing from you, Mr. Patel. Let me ask you, sir, what are the means in which you expect collaboration between Indian companies as well as global pharma companies to take shape as we move forward?
So I think it's going to be more around manufacturing oriented, wherein Indian companies can become a supplier of either the intermediate or product to the foreign companies, and ensure those companies who were mainly dependent on China for their supply would definitely look at India now more openly and aggressively to make sure that their supply chain is secured. So Indian company has a lot of opportunity
so
to
in
create
the last...
either... Sorry, go ahead.
In the last 2 months, Mr. Patel, how many offers have come your way? How many talks have started or restarted? What's the level of engagement given the opportunities that you speak of?
Shereen, I don't have a number, but we are definitely seeing a renewed interest. That much I can say.
Okay. Samina, are you going to give me a number? How many conversations are you having in a day?
I think we're having multiple conversations, and I think having inked an agreement with Gilead for remdesivir to manufacture as well as distribute in 127 countries. We have a distribution agreement with Roche for tocilizumab in India. So I think a lot of discussions around partnerships. The government is also giving us a fast-track regulatory pathway for drugs that are not approved in India, so we can have accelerated clinical trials, etc. So there is tremendous amount of opportunity. India is a large market, and people are definitely looking at India favorably. Cipla will do anything and everything to provide access to affordable drugs to people in India. So we continue on that accelerated path.
Let me end then by asking each one of you, and Mr. Piramal, I'll start by asking you, what do you make of the various reports that are coming in on the vaccine trials that are currently underway? Do you believe that, any significant breakthrough is at least 12 months away, if not more?
Sorry, I couldn't, it was not clear, your question. If you can please repeat it. Yeah.
No, the vaccine development programs that are currently underway, do you believe that we're at least 12 months away from any significant breakthrough on that front? What do you make of all the developments?
Unfortunately, I'm not an expert, and I hear so many varied things, from a vaccine coming up in January to it coming in 18 months. So today, frankly, from my understanding, it is a speculative thing. I can tell you 12 months, that sounds good. Some people say 6 months. So I can't give a fix. And at least till now, I've heard many people, read a lot. I've not yet got a confidence that when the vaccine will come. I know that it will happen. That's where human ingenuity is there. But when it will come, I don't know.
Yes, when it will come, we don't know, Mr. Patel. We're coming to the close of lockdown 4. We don't know what shape lockdown 5 will take, but what do you believe it should look like? Do you believe that there is need for this, this nationwide lockdown to continue?
So I think we have chosen the path of going to lockdown, and through that gradually win away the areas. We'll need to continue doing so, in my opinion, but only limited area, and that's the way I think gradually we can win against this battle. So
okay,
more
so
opening,
continue with the partial relaxation.
Partial, right.
Samina, a final word to you. How do you, how would you like to see the lockdown move as we head closer to the 31st of this month?
So I definitely think that we have to move with the calibrated opening up of the economy. I think it's lives versus livelihood. And we have been in lockdown for over 60 days now. And I think the industry needs to be boosted again. People need to get back. Employment levels will fall further if we don't reboost our economy. So I'm all for a calibrated opening up of the economy. Containment zones should be kept contained. We should be extremely strict with how public move around. Industries have to take responsibility of their manufacturing plants and their offices, but I think somewhere the economy needs to start moving. So I'm all for a calibrated, well thought through, structure to open the economy back.
Calibrated reopening of the economy. That is the ask there coming in from industry. Ajay Piramal, Pankaj Patel and Samina Hamied, thanks very much for joining us here on the CNBC-TV18 Global Dialogue to talk to us about the future road ahead for India's pharmaceutical industry and our efforts to try and beef up our capabilities in innovation beyond being the generics drug manufacturer of the world. But we leave it there for this evening. From all of us here, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.